This one's an interesting one from Sid on Insta. He asks, given recent bids from Galatasaray, is it appealing for Ederson to move, or should he fight for his place at Manchester City? He wants to take that one first.
But we had a conversation just before we came on air about what Victor Osimhen is making at Galatasaray, and perhaps that conversation on its own might have been enough to shift my thinking on what's a more appealing option for Ederson if he can get himself a pay deal like what Victor Osimhen's got.
It's a lot of Jaffa cakes, isn't it?
It's a lot of Jaffa cakes.
I mean, look, if financially there's one answer to Sid's question, and it doesn't need the second part of the sentence, does it? But it's really difficult because to me it feels as if, we always say first impressions last in life. I think that's completely wrong. I think last impressions last in football as well as in life. And I think at the moment, Ederson, despite not being old, despite being one of the very best goalkeepers in the world, is underrated and unrespected because he has simply had his worst season for Manchester City in the season just gone. He's not the only Manchester City player to be in that position of having his worst season at Manchester City, I would argue, because their standards have been so ridiculously high over the past 5 or 6 seasons. But it's funny, we were describing, when we were talking about the possibility of Gigi Donnarumma going to Manchester City, which has always felt a bit weird to me, as it felt weird to a lot of people. No, and certainly not to that level. And so you think, logically, what is the sort of goalkeeper that Pep Guardiola would ideally want? You think, someone who's an exceptional shot stopper, who's not shy in coming off his line, who's fine with the sort of physical contact that you get in the Premier League, who can play the short game with his feet and the long game. You're just describing Ederson. You're describing the goalkeeper that they've already got. Now, of course, Galatasaray are interested in him, because why wouldn't you be interested in him? Now, Donnarumma, of course, has been another one on the Galatasaray rumour mill. Of course, we've all got to put this in the perspective of Fernando Muslera, quit at the end of last season, in his 40s now, had an unbelievable run at Galatasaray, but the sort of transfer policy that Galatasaray and Fenerbahce have at the moment is very star-driven. So why wouldn't you try and get an Ederson or a Galatasaray? And success breeds success. We're going back 2 years ago and we said, there's no way Mauro Icardi would go there. He goes there on loan. There's no way Mauro Icardi would go there permanently. He goes there permanently. And now you're down the line.
There's no way Victor Osimhen's going there when you've got Chelsea knocking on his door.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're there with Osimhen's and Skriniar's and John Duran's and all these other sorts of players that were ending up in the Turkish Super League. So clearly it's a different era, a star-based era where they can sell their clubs worldwide in a way that they never could before. So clearly there's an interest from both sides in getting Ederson. But if we're talking about who would be the best goalkeeper for Galatasaray, this is a team that is still a Turkish team, which means they will play in a very front foot way, a very front foot way. That is that is Terim ball, if you like, and that still exists in Turkish football. So what do you need? You need a goalkeeper who can not only pass over the top if he needs to and pass short if he needs to. He needs to be good with his feet and he needs to play off his line. So for me, if you were Galatasaray, and I don't know if this is really part of the question, but I'm interpreting it as part of the question, who would you rather have, Ederson or Donnarumma? And I think the answer is the same for Galatasaray as it is for Manchester City. You'd far rather have Ederson.
That's such a fascinating answer, isn't it, Nikki?
Yeah, I think Andy's answered that question really, really well. I think the only counterpoint I could come at with is, if you're going to play that much on the front foot, you also really need a great shot stopper, and Donnarumma has certainly proven himself to be that. I think you and Lars had a great conversation on Donnarumma last week. Lars was very, very focused on how suave Donnarumma was, but yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. I think you covered a lot of the bases really well, so I don't know if it's worth repeating all of that, but I do think maybe just worth highlighting for people, because you did for me, Andy, like the tax regime in Turkey is very favourable for top earners like that, which is certainly part of it.
Essentially, they're allowed to be, they get given a tax-free salary because it's easy for the club to cover it.
Yeah.
So that makes a massive difference. Look, I think in the current situation, Galatasaray will probably offer him a longer contract, and that's why they've come to an agreement on what a contract would look like already, it seems. player and club, but it would be another enormous thing for Galatasaray. And I think if you've done it all at Manchester City, it must seem quite an exciting thing to go somewhere new, which is a massive club where you know there's going to be a huge atmosphere every week, whether you're playing Eyüpspor or whether you're playing PSG in the Champions League, and to be part of something that's going in a really interesting direction. And a team that you talked about it before, Nikki, like a team that is setting itself to genuinely compete in the Champions League.
It feels like this team's at the very least going to be capable of bloodying someone's nose this year. Like you look at that attack and just on its own, you think how many teams in all of Europe, how many teams feel as good about their attack as Galatasaray do. And if you start adding in extra pieces on top of that, I'm with you as much as I, with my patriotic Italian hat on, might want to cheer for Donnarumma. I think if you're talking about a player who just gives you an extra dimension as a team, Ederson is the one who does that, because he gives you so much more of that playing out from the back, essentially, just that ability to transition quickly into those attacks. And if you keep throwing forward with this combination, it's going to be scary for teams, and maybe it'll all go up in flames, and maybe I'm overestimating it, but I really have, I think I've said 100 times this podcast, I think that Osimhen is in absolute one of the best strikers on the planet. And so when you've got that as a starting point and then you start adding in Icardi and everything he's been around it, there's a lot of defences that are going to struggle.
Can I slightly abuse my position in being at this table and add in a little extra bit to this question, a little appendix? With Ederson, and we'll talk about Alisson, we've just had Lucas Perry come to the Premier League and like with Leeds and make a really, really good debut. He's great for Lyon last season. Do we think that Brazil is overtaking Italy for depth of goalkeeping talent?
Ooh.
I mean, Italy certainly has depth of goalkeeping talent. We could talk about...
but traditionally, we think of Italy as like the home of goalkeeping, really, don't we?
Yeah, and I suppose this comes back to evolution of the game. And I remember talking to people at the Coverciano, the manager's school there, about this idea of fluidity and goalkeepers having to be involved, and talking about that. Gosh, I mean, more than a decade ago. So it's not like it's new stuff, but it does feel like Brazil started producing that kind of goalkeeper quicker than other places did. And so to a certain degree, generationally, they are more equipped for it. But I definitely don't think there's a shortage of Italian goalkeeping talent right now. Donnarumma obviously is holding down that number one spot for Italy. But when I start looking at Di Gregorio, when I look at Vicario, there's a few really good Italian keepers out there as well at the moment.
Yeah, Andy, thank you for abusing your position. But I just want to be clear on one thing, as it's part of Sid's question. Are you both saying that Ederson should not fight for his place at Manchester City? Are you both saying that?
I suppose there's one element we haven't really talked about, which is just the personal element of it. And this is the bit you can't answer for someone. They know what they want. What drives Ederson right now? If it's just money, we've covered that. But if it's ambition, there's different ways even then that you can have ambition, because Ederson has won the Premier League. He has won the Champions League. So is he driven to go and win those things again, which is a perfectly normal and top, I suppose, traditional top ambition you could think of. But also he might have a different ambition, which is how fun would it be to go and win somewhere completely new and do something that I haven't done before? That's also, I think, a completely valid form of ambition. And that's the bit that I can't answer for people. I think that my inclination has always been that if I had the blessings of talent and also hard application that professional footballers have to go and have adventures in different places at different times, I would have wanted to do all the adventures while I was still young to enjoy them.
This is the part of the season where we hastily make predictions and then regret them, don't we? So I'm going to say that Ederson does sign for Galatasaray and he'll score a goal in the Turkish Super League this season.
That's what we like to hear. Thank you. Haas, also on Insta, asked, what's next for Ademola Lookman after Inter Milan pulled the plug on the deal for him? He's had quite a journey of not getting the move that everybody expects him to get. Yeah. Nikki, what was going on? Why did Inter not go for him in the end?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Another one that boggles my mind a bit, that he's such a talented footballer. Andy was saying it, the best African footballer there is currently playing. And he is an exceptional talent, was on the Ballon d'Or shortlist obviously last season, and deservedly so. Last summer tried to get a move to Paris Saint-Germain and couldn't get it across the line, and said okay, came back, had a great season again under Gasperini. This summer he really has tried to make it happen. He has done the part, I suppose, which he feels is justified by the breaching of what I guess you would still call a gentleman's agreement between him and the club, where he felt like they'd agreed to let him go, and when they didn't honour that, he dug his heels in, didn't come to training for a couple of weeks. Has now come back to training, is being made to train apart from the main team. So that's where we are currently, at least as we're recording on Thursday. This is, of course, a moving situation. So right now, the club has effectively frozen him out of their short-term plans, despite also not having let him leave, because they've said, well, you disappeared without permission, you should have been at training, and so we're not just going to welcome you back with open arms. That suggests to me that they are still open to selling him. They're just not willing to do it for less than what they think he's worth, which we were talking about this again before we came on. It's pretty fair. Inter were willing to go to about 40 million euros for him. He probably is worth more than that in the current transfer market. And it's surprising to me that there isn't someone making that offer. So what's next? Well, there's a few possibilities. Perhaps someone like Tottenham, for instance, after the Eze deal didn't work out for them, might look at the situation and go, actually, that's a really good footballer that we could add in a very similar skill set and role that would boost the attack. I, again, think it's crazy that someone from the Premier League hasn't made that step already. The other possibilities are that Atalanta cave and say, okay, Inter can have him for 40 million, because Inter really don't look like they're going to offer more at this point. And there is, of course, Beppe Marotta involved in this negotiation. He's a good negotiator. Maybe he is keeping his cards close and they'll come back with an improved offer towards the end of the window.
So Inter are still interested. They're still interested, but not at any price.
I think Inter, they've made two bids, the higher of which I think with bonuses could have got to 45 million euros. But I don't think they're suddenly uninterested in him at that price. Whether they're interested in going higher, I don't know. And so it's definitely at least some element of game of chicken going on there. So we're in that most unpredictable chapter of the transfer market. I don't know if Atalanta are hoping that someone else will come in and force the issue by making that better offer. But if not, we're going to get to the end of the transfer window and the clubs are going to have to make a decision. Are Atalanta willing to not sell him? But then how do you reintegrate him? Will he be someone who will accept reintegration? My hunch is he would in the end, because he's a footballer and he likes playing and he's good at it. And I don't think he's one of these ones who would dig his heels in so hard that he would stop playing altogether. But that still requires some path to a conciliation. But I think the best outcome for everyone involved is probably still that a different club comes in that is suitable, acceptable to Lookman, that is acceptable with the offer to Atalanta, which probably means one from outside of Serie A. I just don't currently have someone that I'm aware of who's making that offer.
This is the problem, really, isn't it? That it's almost the situation that Sergej Milinkovic-Savic was in at Lazio for a while. He's got far higher cachet in Serie A than he does anywhere else. Like, people have a preconceived idea of Lookman from when he was at Everton or Fulham, which is ridiculous.
Charlton,
but in a top division context, yeah. Look, we all admire him for scoring against Wimbledon in a league match. I think the point is that completely unfairly, there is a preconceived idea of what he is as a footballer here. That no longer holds. He has become a player who's won European finals, who's won the African Footballer of the Year. But the problem is, if you've got if the highest point of value you've got is in Serie A, you don't have the clubs with the most money in Europe there, like we were saying in the main show yesterday. So they've got a bit of an issue, and they've also got an issue, Atalanta, in that he's at his absolute peak at the moment. He's not going to be worth. There are two sides to it. He's not going to be worth more than he is at the moment. So they have every right to try and extract maximum value for it. But they have to be aware that his value is probably only going to creep down from here if they leave it a year or two.
But there is one other thing just to throw into it, which I do think is relevant. And I find it frustrating that this continues to be relevant, and it's just one of those dynamics that there isn't really a way around, which is that you have got, again, Africa Cup of Nations in the middle of the season, and while it's really unfair on a player like Lookman to say to them that this is somehow damaging your value, because why shouldn't he want to go and represent his country and do that in the continental competition? There are going to be clubs who look at that and go, but do I want to spend that money on a player who isn't going to be there for us for a bit in the middle of the season? That is a dynamic that is also part of this as well.
I hope that answers your question, Hass. I don't have any more questions on that one, although I could turn to Andy and say, him being the great predictor, he's already predicted that Ederson would score a goal in the Super League. Where was the most likely place for Ademola Lookman?
Oh, sorry, I thought you were going to say what place would he score the goal from? I'm thinking header at the near post. I still think Lookman will end up at Inter.
This from Chris on Blue Sky. With Lille losing so many of their key players this season, do they have any plans to replace them?
I mean, they've already started on it to a degree. I mean, obviously the big ones to go are Chevalier and Jonathan David. They're the really difficult ones to replace. Now, obviously the Donnarumma situation accelerated the exit of Chevalier. They'd hoped to hang on to him this season and he would have stayed, no problem. But Jonathan David was always the difficult one because he was going on a free as well. So not only difficult to replace if you get a fee for him, but if you're getting nothing for him, even tougher. But look, Lille have been going in a certain direction for a while. You look at the young players that they're building around. You look at Haraldsson. You look at Ayoub Bouhadi, who was brilliant in the Champions League last season. Had a great match against Real Madrid. Just at 17, which was remarkable, really. So they're trying to get a bit younger. Having said that, of course, the immediate replacement for Jonathan David, Olivier Giroud, at 38 years old. Great start for him, got the opener against Brest. He's been brilliant pre-season. And I think really to sort of think outside the box, and you have a president there in Olivier Letang, who was the deputy sporting director at PSG for quite a long while. So he's someone who understands how the transfer market works, which really helps. I think in terms of squad composition, that helps as well, because Giroud maybe wouldn't have worked for them last season. And I'm not sure that many clubs would have taken a risk on him when he's 38 and coming off like a really bad time, actually, at LAFC. It didn't work out for him at MLS at all when we all thought it would. But it's worked so well because they need a few experienced pillars to bring on those younger players. And you know what? It seems that people have really taken to him. You look at the way that the younger players reacted to him arriving. Now, I saw Florian Thauvin, who's just turned up at Lens from Udinese, going, I think it's great for fans that, all these heroes from the France 2018 World Cup winning team are coming back. Well, no, he was talking about himself. Yeah. It's like, everyone remembers you from France winning the World Cup, mate. But actually, in the case of Olivier Giroud, I think that's really true. Like people are like, you're France's top scorer, and you're that guy, aren't you? And I think he really gets a kick out of that as well. So he seems re-energised by the experience. It's difficult for them because no French club has got a bottomless pit of money at the moment. You've got the fact that because of the TV deal and the fact that they're switching to this, in-house pay-per-view model rather than going for a major broadcaster, all the clubs on their financial workouts, their submissions to the DNCG, the financial watchdog at the start of the season, were required to put 0 from television revenue, which is remarkable, really. And then they're not allowed to put down future sales of players as well, which they were allowed to in the past. Add to that the fact that Lille haven't qualified for the Champions League. Add to that teams of a similar level, and you look at like Strasbourg have got a load of extra clout because, of course, they're owned by Blueco, which means essentially they're an extension of Chelsea. They've spent over 100 million in this transfer window already, with a few more signings to come. So Lille have got to be a little bit more prudent, but they're a smart club who I think are going to run things well.
Thank you. From Frederick on email, with Club Brugge convincingly beating Rangers, well, I'm not sure about the convincing, but nevertheless, convincingly beating Rangers in the Champions League qualifiers, what's their European potential this season?
It's another team that's slightly difficult to predict, just because part of the success of Bruges, and we've talked about this exact theme earlier in the podcast, is this idea that you play in the Champions League and you make money, and they've been in 7 of the last 9 seasons, I think. You make money, and that allows you to sustain a level of ahead of your domestic league, and then that has then in turn allowed them to develop talent that gets sold on for good prices, which gives them more money to stay ahead of their domestic league. So they are building a model that has been very successful, but it has involved selling players. So Aaron Jashari, I think, is the biggest one this summer, which is 30 million euros off to Milan. So they have done a rebuild. Having said that, they looked pretty good against Rangers, didn't they? So
really good.
Yeah, you look at it and think, well, it's clearly a successful turnover that's working out well for them. Because they are selling players, you look at and think that was one of the players who stood out last time. You look at some of this team and think, I'm not as familiar with them because I haven't seen them play for Bruges, but it looks like a very strong team again.
And you look at the experience they've managed to retain as well. Hans Vanaken still in there. Michele, who got the third goal, Ibrox as well, that good strike from the edge of the box. And then you've got Simon Mignolet in goal. And I think we talked about that balance between young talent and experience. That's definitely what they have. And as Nikki says, they're consistently good in the Champions League. And this is a team that I think if any English team drew them in the Champions League in the knockout rounds, you'd think, oh, easy, no problem. But it's not. But bear in mind, they've been able to get through rounds of the Champions League, knocked Atalanta out last season, of course, of the Champions League. This is a team that have emerged from the group in recent seasons and know how to get it done.
I look forward to the return fixture against Rangers. We'll see how convincing that is or otherwise. But meanwhile, Ben has sent us this email, and it is that time in the season, in the European leagues, the beginning of the season, where we do get this question coming thrown at us on a regular. So Ben's question: which league will have the closest title race this season? Yesterday on OTC, I suggested, from what you've been telling us about Serie A, that it would be the Italian league. Nikki, do you stick with that or do you twist?
I think so. I think certainly not a very on the continent answer, but I think it's possible that the Premier League could end up having a very close title race, and that's worth acknowledging. But I do think that when you look at the other big leagues across Europe, I look at the Bundesliga and I think, well, I certainly, when we talked about this as well yesterday, I expect Bayern Munich to win that. I look at the Liga and I think, well, I'm very confident that PSG are going to win that. Spain's maybe a little bit more interesting, but I definitely don't think you see that again with the same depth of possible winners. Because this season in Italy, yes, Napoli have to start as favourites. They start as favourites because they won last time. And as I was talking about when we talked about them yesterday, they have kept their manager, where 12 out of 20 teams, including 6 of the top 8, haven't kept their manager. And again, out of the other teams in the top 8, it's just Juventus who changed in March. So there's so much turnover at the top, you think they're favourites. But are they confident favourites? I mean, they weren't favourites last season. They're now playing in the Champions League as well. They have lost Lukaku to injury. So maybe they're not way out in front of everyone. Maybe we have got Inter, who last season everyone agreed had the most talented group. But Inter have this manager who's only had 13 games of management. So could it be Max Allegri at Milan with no European games to worry about and being the very pragmatic but effective manager that he's been? Could it be that the Gasperini project at Roma takes off? Could Atalanta, despite losing Retegui and maybe Lookman, do something? None of them feel so convincing that I can make a strong case for them. If anyone was going to run away with it, in my mind, it almost has to be Napoli or Inter, but I don't see them running away with it, so I think it'll be close.
I'm going to, obviously neither of these are in the top 5 leagues, but a lot of people will say Turkish Super League because of Galatasaray and Fenerbahce. With all of these, we have to caveat it. There's plenty of transfer window to go, even more so in Turkey, of course, where the window doesn't shut till September 12th. And so there'll be a few players who miss out on moves who strengthen those teams, I think, after the deadline in the rest of Europe goes. But I think Galatasaray have got the drop on Fenerbahce, and I think it'll probably be about the same distance between them as it was last season. So I'm going to go for Portugal. I think this season, the things that make a difference, Gyökeres going, which brings Sporting back to the pack a little bit, although they've recruited very ambitiously this summer. You look at Luis Suarez, not that one, coming in to replace Gyökeres. You look at Vagianidis, who they've been looking at for a long time, coming in from Panathinaikos. They've managed to hold on to Morita in midfield, which is a plus two, as well as Trincao and Pedro Gonçalves. Benfica are ambitious as always. They're out there in the market making stuff happen, and that they will do again right up until the deadline. And Porto are the one to watch for, I think, because AVB has provided a lot of money for new recruits for Francesco Farioli, who I think needs to prove, having proved that he's an interesting coach, needs to prove now that he's a coach who can win titles. And I think he'll have an opportunity, not just because they've been able to bring in the likes of Gabri Vega, Victor Froholt, the teenager from Copenhagen, who started very, very well indeed. They already have Rodrigo Mora, Samu, Diogo Costa, although, again, whether Samu and Diogo Costa are there at the end of the window, I think is a question. AVB's staked his reputation on them going big in the transfer market this summer. And the thing that they have to their advantage is, unlike Sporting and Benfica, they're not in the Champions League. I think for a team with the sort of squad of Porto, they have the ability to spare their efforts a bit more in the group stage of the Europa League. They'll qualify even if they put half a team out for most of those games. I think in terms of miles on the clock, especially when it's traditionally so close at the top in Portugal, I think that'll make a difference.
So, in answer to your question, Ben, Italy and Portugal. It's that time when we ask both of you to recommend a game of the week for us to enjoy, if it's over the weekend or maybe a little after that. Who knows, maybe even before. What would be your game of the week, Nikki? The reason we ask you to do this is so that we can get onto your food suggestions as well.
I know. Oh, God. The game of the week was a struggle this week because it, of course, is the first weekend of the Serie A season, and I'm excited about a lot of them. I do think Sassuolo against Napoli just has that little hint of could be an upset to me. Sassuolo coming up with some familiar faces, Loriente and Berardi up front. And if you're looking for a team that could get at you and cause you some ruffles, especially in this moment when Lukaku is injured, that is definitely on my cards. But I think my game of the week is still Roma against Bologna, which comes after that on Saturday night. Really just comes down to I'm so curious to see this Gasperini Roma side, what it's going to look like. We've seen him for 9 years in Bergamo with Atalanta. We saw him create the most successful chapter in that club's history, win a European trophy, consistently qualify them for the Champions League. Roma have not been consistently qualifying for the Champions League, so they desperately need him to bring some of that magic. And there's some players there who are really interesting as well. I mean, very real chance that it could be Evan Ferguson starting up front this weekend. We don't know the starting 11 yet, so very curious to see how his chapter there pans out. Some talk even today as we're recording about Artem Dovbyk, who's the incumbent starting number 9, possibly being sold. So, yeah, really curious to see how they pan out. Bologna, of course, were also fascinated to watch last season, really successful under Vincenzo Italiano, despite expectations that it would be a struggle after Thiago Motta. And they've had to let go of some big pieces again, which is a challenge for them. Obviously, Dan and Doi going to Nottingham Forest, but also Sam Bakema going to Napoli. But Italiano has done really great work the last couple of years. So I think that's a really, really one of those games that sets a tone at the start of a season. And I know you're waiting for my food. And I did come in slightly unprepared on the food, which is very disappointing of me.
Don't worry, I can heat it up. What have you got for me?
Do you know, in my head, actually, because I'm thinking about Roman dishes, I was thinking about bacala, but I also know I listened last week and you were sick of Lars suggesting fish, so we're not going to suggest fish. We'll keep it classic and we'll get carbonara.
You can suggest fish, but Lars, it's this dried fish from up the north of Norway. Who would eat that?
Well, cleanse your palate, Dotton, with a classic Roman spaghetti carbonara, eggs, guanciale, pecorino romano. It's going to be a good time.
You've already changed my lunch plans.
Yeah, even the sound of it. Pecorino Romano. Was it Pecorino Romano?
Romano.
Okay,
yes.
Yeah, of course. Pecorino Romano. You got to follow that, Andy, in a moment. But let's start with your game of the week recommendation.
Yeah, so we've gone for Lille Monaco on Sunday. We've already talked a little bit about Lille. A lot happening at Monaco already. Now, that, as we said, they might lose a couple of big players before the end, as we said in yesterday's show. Elis Ben-Seguir attracting a lot of interest from Leverkusen, so we'll see what happens there. But they've had an interesting transfer window because we looked at the fitness records of the major players they signed this summer. Pogba, who of course isn't going to be fit to play until October, and goodness knows what sort of nick he's going to come back in. Ansu Fati still battling to get fit as well. And the other one of the old guy Holy Trinity, I know Fati's not an old guy, but of course he's had his fitness difficulties. Eric Dyer. Eric Dyer, straight in the team last weekend, big hit with everyone, scored a goal as they beat Le Havre. And halfway through this week, it looked like Dennis Zakaria was off to Saudi Arabia and he'd even become the new captain after one game. That's how much they love him already. So a bit of Eric Dyer is good to get involved. I think Monaco are going to be really good again this season. I have a good feeling about them. And Lille can inconvenience them. It'll be noisy. It'll be a big crowd. As we said, they've got quite an exciting young team. When you're in that part of France in Nord-Pas-de-Calais, all your schoolboy French is going to do you no good because the accent is quite particular. It's like going to Newcastle. Chez le Ch'ti, exactly. Bienvenue chez le Ch'ti. But of course, there's quite a lot of Belgian influence in terms of food and drink as well. So you have to go straight for the Flammenkuchen, which is it's kind of like a pizza. It's a flat thing that you get on a sort of chopping board. All sorts of flavours, really nice. Get one with loads of onions on. And all sorts of cheeses there as well. And probably some sort of beer cocktail as well.
It's Belgium.
Will level it out for you. It's almost Belgium.
Yeah, well, that sounds like cracking. We're going to eat well, I know that. And hopefully we'll enjoy the match as well, which is Lille versus Monaco. Andy's pick, which is on Sunday at 7:45. And then, of course, Nicky's pick was Roma versus Bologna, which is on Saturday at 7:45. Thank you for listening to Ask OTC. And if you'd like to ask a question, you can contact us at any time at Radio Dotton, at Andy Brassel, or at Nicky Bandini. And of course, you can email us otc@footballramble.com.